Oh, I love this account here in chapter 13. It's one of my favorites. And it really cuts you right to the quick. Thus Yahweh said to me, go and get yourself a linen girdle and put it on your loins, but do not put it in water. So I bought a girdle according to the word of Yahweh and put it on my loins. Now, this word girdle is kind of strange, especially to men. What is this girdle? Okay, this girdle thing. In Hebrew, it's the word azor, which means the idea of a belt or a piece of cloth or garment that encircles the body to hold things in place. Okay, that's a girdle. All right, now you got to picture the way that they dressed. They wore robes and other things. They didn't have, the undergarments that we have. They didn't have the pants or clothing that we have. They had to hold things in place and they gird themselves up. They would bind themselves up with cloth. Okay, they would hold things together so that the garments would, stay where they were supposed to stay and whatever, so they wouldn't embarrass themselves. It's not the idea of a girdle. As a matter of fact, I don't think that women today, they even sell these things like they used to do when generations go by, women walking around in girdles. But so men read this thing and it's like, here's a man being told to go and get a girdle. It really is not like we think of it today. It was a particular type of a cloth that was used like a belt to tie around your body to hold things in place. I mean, we use a belt the same way today on a pants. It has the idea of encircling and wrapping and holding together and securing something to the body, okay? So he says, go get this cloth. He says, but don't put it in water and put it on your loins. So they use it to wrap around, to cover, their private areas, to put it around your loins. And the word of Yahweh came to me a second time saying, now take the girdle that you bought, which is on your loins, and arise and go to the Euphrates and hide it there in a hole in the rock. And I went and hid it by the Euphrates as Yahweh commanded me. So he said, look, go and basically stick it by the river under a rock. And put it by a rock, so why? So it wouldn't just float away somewhere, okay? So basically it's not so much under, in other words, he said, put something on it so it's not going to float away. He says, and I went and hid it by the Euphrates, Yahweh's commanded me. And it came to be after many days that Yahweh said to me, arise and go to the Euphrates and take from there the girdle which I commanded you to hide there. So I went to the Euphrates and dug, and I took the girdle from the place where I had hidden it, and there was the girdle ruined, and it was completely useless. He didn't just say it was dirty because it was buried. He said it was now ruined and useless. So what had happened to it? Because it had gotten wet and the fibers had gotten saturated and soaked, it was no longer had the elasticity to hold anything together. It was just completely flimsy and of no use. It would no longer have the strength and integrity of the cloth to be able to bind anything and hold anything together. He said, look, it's useless. He said it was ruined. Now, I like that word there. It was ruined too. In other words, here's something that had been designed for a specific purpose, and now because of what had happened to it, it had been watered and gotten soaked. It's now ruined and useless. We could almost say the idea if it was watered down. Think about that for a second. And the word of Yahweh came to me, verse 8, saying, thus said Yahweh, thus I ruin the pride of Yehudah and the great pride of Jerusalem. And we talked about this last week quite a bit. I believe we talked about this idea of pride being the whole cause behind all of this. If not in the teaching, we did it in the men's class. I know we talked about it quite a bit. It's the pride that causes us to do the I stuff. But I don't want, I don't think that's fair. Why do I have to do that? That's all pride. He says, look, I'm going to ruin the pride of Yehudah and the great pride of Jerusalem. This evil people, so now it's calling the people evil. Why? Because they're breaking commandments. Not because they're necessarily just going out there killing each other, but they're breaking commandments, whatever commandments it was. This evil people who refuse to hear my words. That's part of how you know the definition of evil there. When he's talking about evil people, he's saying they're called evil because they refuse to hear my words and who walk in the stubbornness of their heart. Remember, they were talking about this teaching is the heart of the matter. Here's that word heart again. And again, in this chapter and in chapter 11, the only place we found heart had to do with stubbornness of heart. He said, who walk in the stubbornness of their heart and walk after other mighty ones to serve them and bow themselves to them is like this girdle, which is completely useless. Now, this is the opposite of what we want to hear when we're looking forward to hearing, well done, you good and trustworthy servant. He's saying, you are badly done, you useless servant. He said, this people are like this girdle, which is completely useless. Wow. What does kadosh mean? Kadosh means to be holy or set apart for the specific purpose of being of some use of the Almighty's. So now here he's saying these people are not kadosh because they're useless. I have no use for them. And we're supposed to be a kadosh nation. He said, I'm calling you. If you obey my voice, I will take you as my people, and you will be a kadosh nation, a set-apart people. In other words, you have been set apart because I have a use for you. And here he's now turned around the other way and said, this people is useless. I have no use for them. Verse 11, for as this girdle clings to the loins of a man, so I have cursed all the house of Israel and all the house of Yehudah to cling to me, declares Yahweh, to become mine for a people and for a name and for a praise and for an adorning, but they did not listen. He said, look, I wanted them to cling to me like this girdle was supposed to cling to a man. They were supposed to be bound tightly, snug together with me. He says, but they did not listen. He said, they did not listen. But let's understand, this is the problem. It always goes back to listening, and it comes to the idea of shomer or shema, being a listener and doer or watchman or guard over. Okay, shomer is a watchman. Shema is to hear and to do or to listen and guard after. He said, but they wouldn't guard and listen and do. So wow. This is a strong encouragement to all of us. You don't want to be looked at as useless. He wanted you to cling to him. You know, we have a teaching called cling, cleave, hold fast. You may want to go back and listen to that. I don't know, it's 4 or 5 parts. It's not 32 parts. But that's what he desires, that we would cling to him. And when I picture clinging, I picture like somebody, you know, in the old movies, this storm is raging like a tornado or something. The person's holding on tight to a tree or something, and they're like almost, their legs are out flying sideways, and they're like being blown in the wind, but they're clinging like crazy to that tree, right? That's what I kind of picture. Or the boat is sinking, and the person's holding on to some part of the boat, and the boat's tipping over, and they don't want to drown and fall in the water, and they're just clinging to that piece of the boat. Holding on for dear life, basically. And that's what he's saying. Look, hold on to me because that is life. Cling on to me because that is life. He says, but they would not do it. They didn't want to listen. And so they're going to get the curses. They're going to get the curses. This is a really strong thing because really he's talking about us. We're that girdle. And I think the water is a great metaphor for the idea that we want things that are watered down. And when things are watered down, guess what they become? Useless. You know, the Torah has power. It has blessing. It's a transformative thing, the tool that he uses to transform us from what we are into the image of his Son. But if we water it down, it has no power. It's useless. Watering it down is not like you can go, because I have people tell me all the time, well, you know, but I do this and this and this, and isn't that good enough? No, it's not good enough. You're doing the watered down thing. Obedience is obedience. Now, perfection in obedience is not expected. He knows you're not going to be perfect. What he expects you to do is to try. He expects you to want to be perfect. We go to Deuteronomy 8:2 all the time, right? Where he leads them through the wilderness. Why? To test and prove whether it's in their heart to be perfect, to keep the commandments, not whether or not they are going to be perfect. But you have to want to be perfect, which means you have to hate it when you're not perfect. You have to be upset when you're not perfect. You have to have a problem when you're not perfect. It has to tear you up to know that you've disappointed him when you're not perfect. I don't mean beat yourself up, meaning like on such a level where you're going to get all depressed because you weren't perfect. He knows you're not going to be perfect. But it's about immediately realizing I need to turn this back around, get back on the path, and fix it so that I'm right again. I got to make things right again. Otherwise, what are you going to do? You're going to be this watered down, useless thing. Because he says, just like the girdle, when it was soaked, became useless. Well, guess what? If you're all watered down, you become useless. And there's not a lack of people out there trying to water down what he has for us. that'll water it down and water it down. What have I said for years now for you guys? For years and years I've said, be a maximalist, not a minimalist. Do it as good and as strong and as much as you can, and not looking for the least and the minimum that you have to do. Everybody comes to me all the time trying to figure out what's the least I have to do. Wrong approach. People say, but do I really have to do that? Maybe not. Do it anyway. Can't hurt. You're never going to go before the throne, in my opinion, and have him say, I'm so disappointed in you. You did more than I told you. I can't see that happening. Okay? However, if you tried to do the minimum and you missed a few spots, he may say, your heart was to try to do as little as possible, and that's not the heart I want in my kingdom forever. So yeah, there may be some things that you don't have to do, or maybe don't have to do as far as you take it. Go the extra mile, do the extra thing. By the way, people say, well, that's how we ended up with things like Talmud. So what? If you did everything in Talmud, it's not going to get you in trouble. The Talmud is not the problem. Treating Talmud like Torah is the problem. Having more rules about Shabbat is not going to get you in trouble. Treating it as if Yahweh said it is what gets you in trouble. Because going the further is that was the whole reason why the Talmud came into existence. I'm not defending it here. I'm just simply saying it came into existence. Why? To put fences around saying if we did more, we'll be sure we didn't do less. In other words, if we did more, we'll know we didn't break the commandment. So let's take it to the extreme and say, if we go this far, we certainly couldn't have broken the commandment. That was where their heart was when they first came up with all of that stuff, was to try to make sure they wouldn't break. And you know where it came out of? Babylonian captivity, which is about to happen here in Yirmiyahu. Okay, because the Talmud comes out of Babylon. Okay? You have two Talmuds. You got the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. But really, all of that teaching and all of those laws and rules come out of the Babylonian captivity, where they said, you know what? This really stinks, to be blunt. We didn't like being in captivity here. Let's make sure this never happens again. Let's go ahead and come up with all kinds of fences to put around the law to make sure we don't mess this up again. You can't blame them for that heart. That, when you got this cushy life now, but what if you were them? And you had all this stuff going on and it was taken away from you when you were in captivity in Babylon. You may want to make sure we don't do that again. I'm not making that mistake again, right? Okay, so I agree. Nobody needs to be studying Talmud and all that other stuff, but just understand where it came from. It came out of what comes from this whole thing going on right here in Jeremiah. Babylon's going to come. Babylon's going to take them into captivity. And at some point, the leadership comes to realize, we deserved this. We messed up. And you have guys like Daniel who are going to understand this, okay, when he's there in Babylon. And so they start to come to an understanding, we need to set this right. And by the way, what's coming? What's coming is a greater situation that's going to require a greater exodus than even Egypt was. And we're going to read about that here in a couple of chapters. But this greater exodus that's going to come is because we're going to also be oppressed. And you know why? Because the body and the world as a whole is a useless watered-down girdle. Don't allow this watering down to minimize your obedience. I don't know what else to say. He says, obey my voice, obey my voice. But he wants us to obey it in fullness and with our heart behind it, and not mechanically and begrudgingly.